Section 3, suffrage and the civil rights. So first of all, we want to start off by asking you guys, how important is the right to vote? And give me a reason why. Anyone?
I think it's super important because
I mean, how important do you see my
somebody
opinion?
finish it.
No, that was at well, it's pretty important, I guess. It's like, what was that, there was that level where there was the non-voters and the voters in the pictures where the non-voters were like, oh, my vote won't matter. And then the voters that are actually trying to vote are getting outvoted by those that aren't even voting. So in a way, their vote does matter, so they're bringing them down. If they were to cast a vote, then it would bring the voters up. Do you guys know what we're talking
It's
about?
important because then democracy won't work then. Like our voices aren't heard then. That's the point of it. And then people think that their vote won't count. But it does. It counts. But see, that's the mentality people have. They're like, oh, my vote won't count, it's just my vote. But
Yeah, and if people.
What was the quote? In the dictatorship, the people vote, but they don't have a choice. In
Oh, yeah.
democracy, the people have a choice, but don't vote. What's it called?
Oh, there you go, Joey.
That
Wow.
picture.
Such a philosophizer.
Wow.
Is this what you're going to say?
Like, if people don't know what's going on, they rely on other people, like their families and stuff.
Oh,
Everyone's vote can matter because the people around you might not care too much, but they understand like what you're going for and stuff like that.
So you said the vote counts, but what if those people aren't informed? What if they haven't taken the time to know the people, know the candidates, know the issues, know the propositions?
Then it still counts, but it could count like in the wrong direction.
Yeah, they don't know what's going on.
Because it could bring down like the candidates that really should be in office because they counteract the votes that people like actually care about or like, are informed. I think that's what Joey was trying to say, that they counteract other votes.
The right to vote is almost as important as life itself to those people who were not allowed to vote. And in the Deep South in the 1860s, not having the right to vote affected many civil rights workers. The 15th Amendment. The motion has paved out the way for African Americans to be able to vote with the ratification of the 15th Amendment in 1870. Tri-Amendment was intended to ensure African American men who had mostly all been slaves and who were living on the South the right to vote. However, the 15th Amendment was not self-executing. In order for it to be made effective, Congress would have needed to act, but for almost 90 years, the federal government paid little attention to the voting rights of African Americans.
And that's what tied into your opener there. That was the kind of the theme there.
Oh, but that's
Yeah, that's what I.
So you guys don't understand what self-executing is?
Yeah. No, wait, explain.
Well, it's like the 15th Amendment back then, like it didn't do what it was intended to do because they just said, oh, this is what the 15th Amendment is supposed to do, but they didn't have provisions or anything that actually were supposed to uphold it or to actually, like how we're just the opener, the jaywalking laws, like we have jaywalking laws, but there's nothing to like make people not do it. Like there's nothing to actually uphold them. You guys try to understand? Yeah.
It's like such a minor staple.
During that time, African Americans were systematically kept away from the laws in much of the South. White supremacists took up a number of tactics to discourage African Americans from voting. They would look to violence, firing African Americans who tried to register or vote, denying family credit at local stores. So do you guys know what like the most used legal device to keep African Americans from voting was? No.
Tasers? Oh, we're talking about weapons,
Wait,
right?
the
These are
what?
weapons or
Like-
laws?
Wasn't
The,
it that
not
scene?
the legal, the most formal legal device used to keep them from voting or discourage them.
You're not talking about like intimidation and
Right,
violence.
no.
Legal. It's legal.
The county.
that would get fired.
No, it's actually the literacy test. And
Whoa.
the white officials took advantage of these tests to disenfranchise African American citizens. And registration laws also serve the same purpose. They were often administered to keep African Americans from voting. Poll taxes, white primaries, and gerrymanders were also used to regularly keep African Americans from voting. The white primary arose out of the decades-long Democratic domination of politics in the South. It was almost a given that a Democratic candidate for an office would be elected. Usually, it was only the Democrats who nominated candidates. In several southern states, political parties were defined by law as private associations.
So why was it that the Democrats dominated Southern politics for so long?
Why they did it?
Why was it that the Democrats controlled the South for so long?
That's because they wouldn't let other candidates come in. So I have a they would exclude whenever they wanted, and Democrats often refused it. So they would refuse to admit other people into the parties.
So they would make sure when someone in the party left an office that another one of their party took over.
But why couldn't the Republicans get a toehold in the South and start competing against the Democrats for political influence?
African American.
Actually started
Woman right.
But Lincoln had a big part in it because a lot of people were pro-Lincoln,
So Joey's saying that, and tell me if this is right or not, Joey's saying that Lincoln had a big part in that because he was a Republican and the blacks were more likely to support what party?
The Republican Party. I think that the Democratic Party, it was powerful in the South for so long because they started off as supporting the farmers, and the farmers were mostly like, they wanted like to have like African Americans enslaved, so they were like for like slaves, and most of the South was for slaves, so that's why they were so powerful in the South, because everyone was for that, and that's what Democrats were.
So you're hearkening back to the party of Jefferson and Jackson, that it was the party of the people, and they were about being farmers and Democrats. And, okay.
The white primary was outlawed by the Supreme Court in the case from Texas Smith versus All White 1944. Early civil rights legislation. The Rights of Act 1957 was the first law passed by Congress to implement the 15th Amendment, and it also set up the United States Civil Rights Commission. The major duty of the commission is to inquire into claims of voters' discrimination and report it to Congress, the President, and to the public through the media. It also gave the Attorney General the power to seek federal orders to prevent interference with a person's right to vote. The Civil Rights Act of 1960 added an additional safeguard because it provided for the appointment of federal voting referee. The Civil Rights Act of 1964, however, proved to be more effective than either of the two earlier measures. The act outlawed discrimination in several areas, especially in job-related matters. When it comes to voting, it outlawed the use of any voter registration or literacy requirement in a discriminatory manner. The law relied on judicial action to overcome racial barriers and emphasized the use of federal court orders called injunctions. An injunction is like, not a law, but it's more of an act that prohibits or limits what a person can do.
Or, we were talking earlier about, remember how the new executive order that President Obama issued meant to streamline or fast-track the legalization of about 6 to 8 million illegal aliens, and there were 26 states which sued in federal court, and there was a federal judge who placed an injunction on the executive order, and that injunction prevents the executive order from what? from happening. So the injunction either stops an action from occurring or mandates that a certain thing actually occur. So it's a judicial power act, a power move.
The Voting Rights Act of 1964. The Voting Rights Act of 1964 was what finally made the 15th Amendment truly effective part of the Constitution. This act was different from the other ones passed before because they applied to all elections held anywhere in the country. The act was only intended to be in effect for 5 years, but Congress extended its life 3 times in the Voting Right of Amendment of 1970, 1975, and 1982. The present version of this law was made effective for 25 years. The 1965 law directed the Attorney General to challenge the constitutionality of the remaining state poll tax laws in the federal courts. Also prohibited the use of any literacy test or any similar device in any state or country where else than half of the electorate had been registered or had voted in the 1964 presidential election.
So here's the real question. With these civil rights, and again, all these civil rights pieces of legislation, 60, 61, 63, 64, and 65, all of these were simply meant to make what actually take effect. It was the 15th Amendment. All these things, that's all it was trying to do, is finally put some teeth into stopping the people from what? Jaywalking. In this case, abusing a whole segment of the population in the South by denying them their constitutional right to vote. So the question is, did it work? Did we see an increase in the black vote in terms of its turnout as a result of these pieces of legislation? Your book clearly states that what? There was definitely,
More African Americans.
yes, turning out to vote.
The Voting Rights Act of 1965 created a further restriction on those states where a majority of the electorate had not voted in 1964. The act declared that no election laws and no changes in election laws could be made in those states without first obtaining pre-clearance by the Department of Justice. Only new and revised laws that did not weaken the voting rights of minorities could survive the pre-clearance process.
So, will you give us an example? What does this mean? Because this is a really, really important point, pre-clearance. Help make sure that everyone in here understands that concept, because it's still in play today. Yeah, that relates to gerrymandering. Yeah. But what does it mean to get pre-clearance? How does that tie into the census?
Pre-clearance is when the Department of Justice says, declares that a law that somebody wants that they want to pass, that it doesn't infringe on the rights of other people to vote. If it weakens them or.
Okay, that's true. If anything that happens by the state weakens the efficacy of specifically a minority group, their power, their vote. And how do we most often see that happening? Every 10 years, what happens? Census. Once that census comes out, we learn whether or not states lose or pick up seats in the House of Representatives, right? Mm-hmm. California, we keep on what? Picking up more seats.
Yeah, I didn't hear what
California.
Jerry's Mandarin, how they were
I love
keeping
California.
blacks in this little small area.
Explain that. Go.
Oh, wait, what? What am I explaining? Oh, how
They were putting the blacks in this one little area that you said.
That's all, folks.
they were just keeping the blacks in a small group, so it would seem like their population was smaller than they really should have been, because the House of Representatives is based on population. So the bigger the country, the more the representative they send, so that way the majority of the people get a voice. And if they would make the district smaller for the blacks, and it would seem like they had less people, so less representatives would get sent, so less people's voices would not be getting heard because the district was small, so they wouldn't have enough seats in there.
Their vote would count, it's just that it wouldn't really make a difference.
Almost. You almost had it right. Every district actually has to have the same number of people in it from that state. Because you get a portion, like California gets, 58 or whatever, 53. So each one of those districts has to have the same number of population. But what they were doing in the South was really sneaky. What they would do in like Alabama and Mississippi is they would say, okay, let's find out how to minimize the black vote. And this is what they used to do in the South before the civil rights legislation. They would say, okay, let's draw, the blacks are kind of in this community, so let's draw a district which takes in this neighborhood. So 100% of that district are what?
Black.
Or close to 100% are black. So they guarantee that district, they know some have to go black. And then what they would do is they would do as many of those districts as they could, where they'd stuff them all into one district. And then you're guaranteed to say, okay, we know they're going to take some, so give them as few as possible. And then what they would do is try and open up all the rest to more competitive. And that's the way they would weed them out. So the percentage of their vote was diluted. It was smaller. And so now what they're saying as part of the pre-clearance is any time after the census, like one of these states that has a history of offending or diluting the vote, they have to show that their districts are not going to dilute the vote of a minority. And believe it or not, that's happened here in California. A couple of counties in this area have to get pre-clearance before they redesign districts because they have a history of minimizing certain minority votes.
It is awesome. Amazing.
Does that make sense? I really want to make sure you understand. It's a really important point. Pre-clearance.
Makes so much sense.
Makes too much sense.
Pre-clearance process. The pre-clearance process has brought about many court cases since the passage of the law. Laws that make these kinds of changes to not get past the pre-clearance process, the location of polling places, the boundaries of election districts, deadlines in the election process, from ward and district elections to all large elections, the qualification candidates must meet in order to run for office.
Going back to the pre-clearance process, some states can not go through that because they go through the bailout process, which is where they prove that the things that they're doing are not they're not using it in a discriminatory manner to keep other people from voting.
In other words, they don't have a history of what?
Of diluting other people's votes, minorities.
Amendment to the Act. The 1970 amendments extended the law for another 5 years. The law also started that for 5 years, states can't use literacy tests as a basis for any voting requirements. This provision was held in the case of Oregon v. Michelle in 1970. The law was extended again in 1985, and this time the ban on literacy tests was not just valid for another 5 years. This time it was made permanent. No state has been able to apply literacy tests to any aspect of the election process since 1975.
Since then, the pre-clearance provisions have also covered any state or county where more than 5% of the voting population belongs to a language minority. The groups are defined to include people of Spanish heritage, Native Americans, Asian Americans, and Alaskan Natives. This is why all ballots and other official election materials must be printed in both English and the language of the minority or minorities. So
in our county, which languages do we see on the ballot that Spanish, Hmong, Lao, Laotian?
Cool.
It's Hmong.
The 1982 amendments extended the basic features of the Act for another 25 years. In 1992, the law's language minority provisions were revised. They now apply to any community that has a minority language population of 10,000 or more persons. Over the years, several states and a handful of countries in other states, counties, and United States have been removed from the law's coverage through the bailout process. So this is the conclusion for Section 3.
No, just had a draft. It was $4 for me. What? My Xbox.